this is very important. So slavery, the Quran doesn't like created some definition for slavery. Slavery just already exists in Arabia. It's widespread, but it's not a big part of economic life. It's not like slavery in the American South or something. The largest group of slaves are other Arabs who've been captured. Then behind that would be like Ethiopians and Persians, and then kind of Byzantine/Greek people would be the lowest number. Now, the Quranic teachings and the Sunnah teachings on slavery are pretty straightforward, right? Which is that you should treat your slaves well. You should give them the same food you eat, give them the same clothing you eat. You can't overburden them. If you strike them in a way that injures them, you should free them. You can't strike them or discipline them in a way that it would cause any kind of like serious injury or anything. Basically, you could discipline them like you would discipline your child or something like that. If you abuse them, they can be freed. The judge or the ruler can free them or make you sell them, right? Now, there's a couple of other major changes that the Quran and the Sunnah institute. One is that the major routes into slavery are shut. So prior to Islam and then the Near East, debt was a major way you became a slave. And this is true in human history. I owe someone money, I can't pay them back, I then become their slave, right? That's one way. Debt slavery is prohibited in Islam. Another way of becoming a slave is to actually, you get slaves, is to like sell your children into slavery. I know this sounds crazy, but why would you do that? But imagine you're starving to death, and you give your kids to somebody, and they're gonna feed your kids and take care of them. Or imagine you're terrified and you're unsafe, and someone says, "Listen, come live in our village. We'll take care of you. Just you and your family will be our slaves." I would say, "Okay, no problem. I'm fine with that." So you're not allowed to sell your children as slavery. You're not allowed to give yourself as a slave. And the only way you can become a slave legally in Islamic law is that you are a non-Muslim outside the abode of Islam. So if you're a non-Muslim living in Muslim society, like a dhimmi, like a Christian or Jew or Hindu or Buddhist or whatever, you cannot be enslaved. But a non-Muslim outside the abode of Islam who's captured in war, that person can be a slave. That's the only way you can be enslaved legally in Islamic law. So now, most slaves in Islamic civilization are not captured in battle or something. They're just bought. So some slave dealer comes from the steppes of Russia with like 500 Russian peasants and says, "I have 500 slaves for you. You want to buy them?" He said, "Okay." So they're already enslaved. You're not enslaving them. They've already been enslaved. Okay. The other major change, and this is very important in Islamic history, that the Quran introduces and the Sunnah of the Prophet introduces, is that if you have a man who owns a female slave and he has sex with her and has a child with her, the child is free, has the same social standing as a child born of a free wife, and the mother cannot be sold, and the mother is freed upon the owner's death. This is very important. This comes from the Sunnah of the Prophet. Now, why is this important? Because think about someone like Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson's children were slaves. With Sally Heming were slaves. Not only that, but they were like, why do we not know about them? Why weren't they famous? Because they're black. They're slaves, and they're not white. They're not part of the elite.
And DNA has verified this recently. I think that he really did have relations with that black slave woman.
Oh, definitely, yeah,
yeah. This is not because it was gossip at the time. Because he was silent about it. Jefferson never refused to make any public announcements, so his enemies kind of speculated wildly. But in fact, we now know from DNA, from various clothing, that he did father these children through this particular woman.
Yeah. So if he lived like a Muslim in a Muslim society.
Mm-hmm.
His children with her would be, one, free. Two, they would be like, Donald Trump's kids. They would be, or like John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, right? They would be people who were in the elite. They could be the next president. And it doesn't matter if they look darker than him, because how you look doesn't matter. Because if your mother, that's why at least half of the Abbasid caliphs were children of slave women.
Amazing.
Almost all, I think with the exception of one or two Ottoman sultans, almost all of the Ottoman sultans were children of their mothers were slave women.
Amazing.
Greek or Italian or Slavic or Serbian or something, right? Slave women.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a huge difference. And that's one of the reasons you don't have, I think, like abolitionist movements that emerge in the Muslim world, because there's no, if you're like a slave in America or the Caribbean or something, the US, even if you're free, like you see the movie 12 Years a Slave, like you're always at risk of being re-enslaved because slavery and blackness are just overlap. There's no way out of slavery. You're not going to get freed. Your children are going to be slaves, right? So there's just no way out. The only way out is to end the institution. In Islamic civilization, if you're a slave, we'll get into this in a second, you're probably going to be freed in a few years. Second, if you're a woman and you have a child with your owner, your son or your child is free and has like same social status as their dad, and you're now going to be freed and you can't be sold, right? So there's no, and by the way, let's say you are freed and you're walking around the streets of Cairo or wherever, or Baghdad. You look like, okay, maybe I'm what? I don't know what I am. Maybe my mom is Russian. Maybe she's Indian. Maybe she's Spanish. Maybe she's Norwegian. Maybe she's African. We have no idea. So what you look like has no impact on your status. So your mom, let's say my mom is African and I'm like, darker skin than the average Joe around me. I'm still the son of like some powerful guy. And and the fact that my mother, I could be the sultan, the next sultan. Mm-hmm. So what people look like doesn't index to their status.